The text message from my 16-year-old daughter Brooke arrived at 2:47 a.m., its glow cutting through the darkness of my small Hawthorne District apartment. The words felt like ice water flooding my veins. I've decided to live with Dad permanently. I'm testifying against you in court tomorrow. You've ruined everything for us, Mom. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I sat up in bed, my hands trembling as I reread the message 3 times, each word searing itself deeper into my consciousness. 3 years of legal battles, 3 years of fighting Nathan Pierce in courtrooms while trying to protect the daughter who now wanted nothing more than to destroy me. The irony wasn't lost on me that tomorrow's custody hearing would determine whether I'd lose Brooke forever, and she had just handed Nathan the ammunition he needed. Outside my window, Portland's rain drummed against the glass with the same relentless persistence that had characterized my ex-husband's campaign to turn our daughter against me. I could almost hear his voice in her text, the subtle manipulation disguised as teenage rebellion. Nathan had always been a master at making his victims feel like they were the problem. 4 years ago, I thought I had escaped Nathan Pierce forever. The day I signed our divorce papers in that sterile conference room, my lawyer Marcus Thompson had warned me that leaving an abusive marriage was often just the beginning of the real battle. At the time, I had dismissed his concerns as overcautious legal speak. Nathan had never hit me in front of Brooke, never left visible marks that would make a judge question his parenting abilities. His abuse was psychological, financial, emotional, the kind that left scars only I could see. The morning after receiving Brooke's text, I stood in my bathroom mirror applying concealer under my eyes, trying to hide the evidence of another sleepless night. At 34, I had learned to perfect the art of looking composed when my world was crumbling. My reflection showed a woman in a navy blazer and pressed slacks, someone who looked like she had her life together. The woman staring back at me bore no resemblance to the broken person who had fled Nathan's Lake Oswego mansion with nothing but a suitcase and our 12-year-old daughter. My phone buzzed with a call from Marcus. His voice carried the weight of someone delivering bad news he'd rather avoid. "Claire, I need to prepare you for what we're walking into today. Nathan's attorney filed additional character witness statements last night. Brooke isn't just testifying for her father, she's actively arguing that you're an unfit parent." The words hit me like physical blows. I gripped the bathroom counter until my knuckles went white, watching my composed facade crack in the mirror. What kind of statements? "She's claiming you've been emotionally manipulating her, that you've poisoned her against her father with lies about his behavior. She says you've made her choose sides and that living with you has become unbearable." Marcus paused and I could hear papers rustling on his end. "Claire, there's something else. She's also stating that you've been financially irresponsible and that Nathan provides a more stable home environment." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar sting of Nathan's handiwork. Even through our daughter, he was still finding ways to hit me where it hurt most. The financial irresponsibility claim was particularly cruel, considering I'd been working 60-hour weeks at the marketing firm just to afford our modest apartment while Nathan lived in luxury with his new girlfriend Stephanie. "How is that even possible?" I whispered into the phone. "She's 16. How can the court allow her to?" Oregon law permits children over 14 to express custody preferences to the judge. At 16, her testimony carries significant weight. Marcus's professional tone couldn't mask his genuine concern. "Claire, I have to ask. Is there anything at all that might support her claims? Any incidents that Nathan could have twisted?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. There had been moments where my frustration with Nathan's manipulation had boiled over into arguments that Brooke witnessed. Nights when I'd cried after particularly vicious phone calls from my ex-husband thinking Brooke was asleep. Times when I'd tried to explain to her why her father's promises were empty, why his gifts came with strings attached, why his affection was conditional. I tried to protect her from the truth about him, I said finally. Maybe I should have let her figure it out on her own. "We'll work with what we have," Marcus replied. "But Claire, I need you to understand the gravity of this situation. If Brooke testifies convincingly against you, and if Nathan's legal team can paint you as the manipulative parent, we could be looking at supervised visitation only. Maybe less." After hanging up, I sat on my bed staring at a framed photo of Brooke and me from 2 summers ago. We were at the Oregon coast, both of us laughing as waves crashed around our ankles. She still looked at me with love then, still trusted me to protect her from the storms in her life. Now she had chosen to become one of those storms herself. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Nathan's campaign to win Brooke back had been methodical, calculated, and devastatingly effective. It started with expensive gifts that I couldn't afford to match, weekend trips to his Lake Oswego house where Stephanie played the role of the cool stepmother who didn't impose bedtimes or homework rules. Then came the subtle comments about how sad it was that I had to work so much, how different life could be if she lived somewhere more comfortable. Nathan understood that teenagers wanted freedom, wanted to feel adult and independent. He offered Brooke everything I couldn't: a car, when she turned 16, designer clothes, a bedroom twice the size of our entire living room. More importantly, he offered her a version of the story where he was the victim, where I was the bitter ex-wife who had stolen her away from the life she deserved. I remember the exact moment I realized I was losing her. It was 3 months ago, during one of our increasingly tense dinners at the small kitchen table in our apartment. Brooke had been unusually quiet, picking at the homemade pasta I'd made after a 12-hour day at work. When I asked about her day, she looked up at me with eyes that held a coldness I'd never seen before. "Dad says you tell lies about him to make me hate him," she said, her voice flat and rehearsed. "He says that's why you divorced him, because you wanted to hurt him and you're using me to do it." The accusation struck me speechless. For months I'd been walking on eggshells, trying not to say anything negative about Nathan despite the evidence of his manipulation that surrounded us daily. I'd bitten my tongue when he was late for pickups, when he made promises he didn't keep, when he sent Brooke home with subtle criticisms of our life together. "Brooke, that's not true," I had said carefully. "I divorced your father because our marriage wasn't healthy. I never wanted you to hate anyone. But you do want me to hate him," she shot back. "Every time I come home from his house happy, you get this look on your face. You ask all these questions about what we did, who was there, what he said. You can't stand that I have fun with him." The conversation had spiraled from there, with Brooke accusing me of jealousy, of trying to control her, of making her feel guilty for loving her father. Every word felt scripted, too sophisticated for a 16-year-old to have developed on her own. I could hear Nathan's voice in her accusations, his ability to twist reality until the victim became the perpetrator. That night, after Brooke had stormed to her room and slammed the door, I sat at my kitchen table and made a decision that would change everything. I opened my laptop and began documenting every interaction, every conversation, every subtle manipulation I could remember from the past 4 years. If Nathan wanted to play games with our daughter's perception of reality, I would make sure someone had a record of what reality actually looked like. The documentation project became my obsession. I kept detailed notes of every phone call with Nathan, every change in Brooke's behavior after visiting him, every expensive gift that came with passive-aggressive comments about what I couldn't provide. I saved text messages, recorded voicemails when legally possible, and maintained meticulous records of when Nathan followed through on promises versus when he found excuses to disappoint our daughter. What I discovered was a pattern of behavior so subtle and manipulative that it would have been invisible to anyone not living it daily. Nathan never directly told Brooke to choose him over me. Instead, he created situations where choosing him felt like the obvious, rational decision. He offered her freedom from rules while portraying my structure as controlling. He gave her material goods while making my financial struggles seem like personal failures rather than the result of single parenthood. Most insidiously, he positioned himself as the parent who believed in her while suggesting I was holding her back. When Brooke wanted to quit piano lessons because they were difficult, Nathan supported her decision and criticized my insistence that she honor her commitments. When she struggled with math, he hired an expensive tutor and made subtle comments about how the chaos of our home life was affecting her performance. The genius of Nathan's approach was that it made Brooke feel like she was making her own choices. She wasn't being told what to think, she was being given information and allowed to draw her own conclusions. The fact that the information was carefully curated and the conclusions were predetermined didn't matter. A 16-year-old couldn't see the manipulation for what it was. As I prepared to leave for court that morning, I looked around our small apartment with fresh eyes, trying to see it as a judge might. The furniture was secondhand but clean, the space cramped but organized. The refrigerator was covered with Brooke's artwork from younger years, back when she still proudly brought her creations home to show me. Her bedroom door was closed, as it had been for months, decorated with photos of her and her father at expensive restaurants and vacation spots I could never afford. The contrast between our life and Nathan's was stark, undeniable, and utterly irrelevant to the question of what was best for our daughter. But I knew that in a custody battle, appearances mattered more than truth. Nathan's Lake Oswego house with its swimming pool and three-car garage would photograph better than our Hawthorne District apartment with its shared laundry room and street parking. I checked my purse one final time, ensuring that the small recording device Marcus had given me was properly concealed. Oregon's consent laws meant I couldn't use it to record conversations without permission, but I could use it to record my own thoughts and observations immediately after interactions. It had become my lifeline, a way to maintain my sanity when Nathan's gaslighting made me question my own memories. The drive to Multnomah County Family Court took me through the heart of downtown Portland, past the marketing firm where I'd been working overtime to pay legal fees, past the coffee shop where Brooke and I used to go for mother-daughter talks before those became impossible. The city looked gray and unwelcoming under the November sky, matching the dread that had settled in my chest. In the courthouse parking lot, I spotted Nathan's black BMW immediately.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
He'd brought Stephanie with him for moral support, something that stung more than I wanted to admit. During our marriage, Nathan had never wanted my emotional input on important decisions. Now he was parading his girlfriend around as if she were an equal parent in our daughter's life. Marcus met me at the courthouse entrance, his expression grave but determined. "Claire, before we go in, I need to know if you're absolutely certain about the evidence we discussed. Once we present it, there's no going back. Brooke may never forgive you for exposing her father this way." I thought about the secret recordings I'd made, the financial documents I'd gathered, the witnesses I'd been reluctant to call, because their testimony would shatter Brooke's idealized view of her father. For months I'd been protecting Nathan's reputation for our daughter's sake, hoping that love would eventually overcome manipulation. Now I realized that my silence had been enabling the very abuse I'd tried to escape. "She may never forgive me if I don't," I replied. "At least this way, she'll know the truth someday, even if she can't see it now." As we walked through the courthouse doors, I felt the weight of everything I'd sacrificed over the past 4 years. My marriage, my financial security, my relationship with my daughter, and possibly my future with her altogether. But I also carried something Nathan didn't know about, something that might change everything if Judge Patricia Hernandez was willing to listen. The preliminary hearing, 3 months earlier, had been a disaster. Brooke had sat in the gallery behind Nathan shooting me looks of pure hatred while he testified about my alleged instability and manipulation. His lawyer had painted me as a vindictive ex-wife, who was weaponizing custody to hurt my former husband, while portraying Nathan as the stable, loving father trying to rescue his daughter from a toxic situation. What they didn't know was that I'd spent the last 6 months building a case that went far beyond he said, she said accusations. The evidence I'd gathered painted a picture of psychological abuse, so comprehensive and methodical that it would be impossible for any reasonable person to dismiss. The question was whether Judge Hernandez would allow me to present it, and whether it would be enough to counteract my own daughter's testimony against me. As I took my seat at the plaintiff's table, I caught sight of Brooke entering the courtroom with Nathan. She dressed carefully for the occasion, wearing a conservative dress that made her look older, more mature, more credible. Her hair was styled professionally, and she carried herself with a confidence that broke my heart. Nathan had prepared her well for this performance. Our eyes met briefly across the courtroom, and for just a moment, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her expression. But then Nathan's hand touched her shoulder, and the moment was gone. She straightened her spine and looked away, her jaw set with determination that reminded me painfully of myself at her age. Judge Hernandez entered the courtroom with the bearing of someone who'd heard every custody story imaginable and had little patience for drama. She was known for being fair but tough, someone who cut through emotional manipulation to focus on facts and evidence. If anyone could see through Nathan's carefully constructed narrative, it would be her. As the bailiff called the court to order, I closed my eyes briefly and thought about the secret evidence that could change everything. The recordings that revealed Nathan's true nature when he thought no one was listening. The financial documents that showed where his money really went. The witness testimonies that would expose the calculated campaign he'd waged against me. But first I would have to sit through my daughter's testimony, listen to her tell a room full of strangers that I was unfit to be her mother, and find the strength to continue fighting for her even as she fought against me. The hardest part wouldn't be Nathan's lies or his lawyer's accusations. The hardest part would be remembering that the young woman preparing to destroy me was still the little girl I'd rock to sleep every night, still the daughter I'd die to protect, even from herself. The courtroom fell silent as Nathan's attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Victoria Cross, called Brooke to the witness stand. My daughter walked forward with measured steps, her chin raised in defiance that felt directed entirely at me. She placed her left hand on the Bible and raised her right, swearing to tell the truth with a voice that carried across the room like an accusation. I watched my child settle into the witness chair, adjusting her dress and folding her hands in her lap with practiced composure. Nathan had clearly prepared her for this moment, coaching her on posture, tone, and presentation. The Brooke sitting before Judge Hernandez bore little resemblance to the girl who used to curl up beside me during thunderstorms, begging me to check under her bed for monsters. Now I was the monster she needed protection from. Victoria Cross approached the witness stand with the confident stride of someone who knew she held winning cards. "Brooke, can you tell the court how old you are and where you currently reside?" "I'm 16 years old," Brooke replied, her voice steady and clear. "I live part-time with my mother Claire Davidson, in the Hawthorne District, and part-time with my father Nathan Pierce, in Lake Oswego." "And how would you describe your relationship with each parent?" Brooke's eyes found mine across the courtroom, and for a split second, I saw the little girl who used to run to me with scraped knees and broken toys. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by something harder, more resolved. "My relationship with my father is open and honest. He listens to me, respects my opinions, and treats me like I'm mature enough to make my own decisions. My relationship with my mother is—" She paused, seemingly searching for the right words, more complicated. Marcus shifted beside me, scribbling notes on his legal pad. I could feel the weight of his concern radiating outward, matching my own growing dread. This wasn't teenage rebellion speaking, this was a carefully rehearsed performance designed to maximum damage. "Can you elaborate on what makes your relationship with your mother complicated?" Victoria pressed. Brooke straightened in her chair, her voice gaining strength with each word. "My mom has a hard time accepting that I'm not a little kid anymore. She questions everything I do, everywhere I go, everyone I spend time with. When I come home from visiting my dad, she interrogates me about what we did, what we talked about, who was there. It feels like she's constantly looking for reasons to criticize him or limit my time with him." The words hit me like physical blows. Each accusation contained just enough truth to feel legitimate while twisting my protective instincts into something sinister. Yes, I asked questions about her visits with Nathan, but only because I'd learned to watch for signs of his manipulation. Yes, I was cautious about her decisions, but only because 16-year-olds needed guidance, not because I wanted to control her. "Have there been specific incidents where you felt your mother was trying to turn you against your father?" Victoria continued. "Many times," Brooke replied without hesitation. "She's told me that my dad only gives me expensive gifts to manipulate me, that he doesn't really care about my feelings, just about winning some kind of competition with her. When I got excited about the car he bought me for my 16th birthday, she said it was just another way for him to buy my love." I gripped the edge of the table, fighting the urge to stand up and defend myself. The car incident had been particularly painful because Nathan had surprised Brooke with a brand new Honda Civic without discussing it with me first. When I'd expressed concern about a 16-year-old having such an expensive gift without earning it, Nathan had twisted my words into jealousy and bitterness. "How did these comments make you feel?" Victoria asked, her tone perfectly calibrated to elicit sympathy. "Confused and guilty," Brooke answered, her voice softening slightly. "Like I was doing something wrong by loving my dad, like I had to choose between my parents, instead of just being allowed to have a relationship with both of them. It made me feel like my mom saw me as a weapon against him, instead of as her daughter." The irony was devastating. Everything Brooke was describing, Nathan had been doing to her for years, systematically poisoning her against me, while making it seem like I was the one forcing her to choose sides. He'd convinced her that his manipulation was love and my protection was control. Judge Hernandez leaned forward slightly, her expression thoughtful. "Brooke, these are serious allegations against your mother. Can you give the court specific examples of times when you felt manipulated or pressured?" Brooke nodded eagerly, as if she'd been waiting for this question. Last month, my dad invited me to go skiing in Bend with him and Stephanie. It was going to be a 3-day weekend, and I was really excited because I'd never been skiing before. When I told my mom about it, she immediately started asking all these questions about who else would be there, what the sleeping arrangements would be, whether my dad had checked with her first. She paused, glancing at Nathan in the gallery. He gave her an encouraging nod, and she continued with renewed confidence. When I said I really wanted to go, she told me that my dad was trying to buy my affection with expensive trips, that Stephanie was just pretending to like me to impress him, and that the whole thing was probably planned to make her look bad because she couldn't afford to take me on vacations like that. My heart sank as I remembered that conversation. I had been concerned about the skiing trip, not because I was jealous of Nathan's financial resources, but because he'd made the plans without consulting me, and had a history of using elaborate gestures to distract from broken promises. But hearing it through Brooke's recounting, my concerns sounded petty and vindictive. "Did you end up going on the skiing trip?" Victoria asked. "No," Brooke replied, her voice taking on a bitter edge. "My mom said she needed more details about the arrangements, that she wanted to talk to my dad directly before giving permission. But then she kept finding reasons to delay the conversation, asking for more information, wanting to speak with Stephanie too. By the time she finally said yes, my dad had already canceled the reservations because he didn't want to deal with all the drama." I closed my eyes, remembering how frustrated I'd been during that incident. Nathan had presented the skiing trip as a last-minute opportunity, giving me less than a week to process the idea of Brooke going on an expensive vacation with his new girlfriend. When I'd asked reasonable questions about supervision and safety, he'd used my caution as an excuse to cancel the trip and blame me for disappointing our daughter. "How did that make you feel toward your mother?" Victoria prompted. "Angry and embarrassed," Brooke admitted. "My dad had been really excited to take me skiing, and my mom ruined it with all her questions and demands. When he had to cancel, he was really disappointed too, but he didn't blame me. He said he understood that my mom was probably struggling with the divorce still, and that we should be patient with her." The manipulation was so subtle, so perfectly executed that I could see why Brooke couldn't recognize it. Nathan had positioned himself as the generous, understanding parent while making me appear controlling and unstable. He'd used my legitimate concerns against me, turning every reasonable question into evidence of my alleged vindictiveness. Victoria moved closer to the witness stand, her voice taking on a more intimate tone. "Brooke, I know this is difficult, but can you tell the court about your living arrangements with each parent and how they differ?" "Living with my mom is stressful," Brooke began, her words coming faster now as if she'd been holding them back for months. "Our apartment is really small, so we're always on top of each other. She works long hours, so she's tired and stressed most of the time. When she gets home, she wants to know everything about my day, every assignment, every conversation. It feels like being under a microscope." She glanced at me briefly and I caught a flicker of something that might have been regret, but it passed quickly. "At my dad's house, I have my own space. My room is bigger than our entire living room at Mom's apartment. I can have friends over without worrying about disturbing anyone. Stephanie is really cool and doesn't try to replace my mom, but she treats me like an adult. They both do." The financial disparity between our homes had always been a source of insecurity for me. I'd worked myself to exhaustion trying to provide stability for Brooke, but I couldn't compete with Nathan's resources. Hearing my daughter describe our modest apartment as inadequate while praising the luxury she enjoyed at her father's house felt like confirmation of my worst fears about not being enough. "When you say they treat you like an adult, can you explain what you mean?" Victoria asked. "They trust me to make good decisions," Brooke replied. "If I want to go out with friends, they don't interrogate me about where I'm going and when I'll be back. If I don't feel like doing homework on a particular night, they understand that sometimes teenagers need a break. They let me stay up late on weekends, they don't monitor my phone, and they respect my privacy." Marcus leaned over and whispered urgently in my ear. "She's describing neglect as if it's freedom. This is classic parental alienation." But I could see from Judge Hernandez's expression that the distinction wasn't necessarily clear to someone who wasn't familiar with Nathan's patterns. Victoria's questions continued for another 20 minutes, each one designed to build the case that I was an unstable, controlling parent who was damaging Brooke's emotional development. My daughter testified about arguments we'd had, rules I'd enforced, and conversations where I'd expressed concern about Nathan's influence. Every normal aspect of parenting was reframed as evidence of my unfitness. When Victoria finally finished her direct examination, Marcus stood for cross-examination. I could see the challenge in his posture. How do you question a 16-year-old girl's perceptions without appearing to attack her? Brooke, Marcus began gently. You mentioned that your father treats you like an adult. Can you tell me about times when your mother has also shown trust in your judgment? Brooke seemed caught off guard by the question. She glanced toward Nathan, then back at Marcus. I guess she trusts me to do my homework and get good grades. What about bigger decisions? Has she ever included you in important choices about your life? She asks my opinion about things, Brooke admitted reluctantly, but then she usually does what she wants anyway. Can you give me an example of a time when you felt your mother didn't listen to your opinion? Brooke was quiet for a moment, clearly trying to think of a strong example. When we were choosing my high school, I wanted to go to the private school near my dad's house. It has a really good art program, and some of my friends were going there. But my mom said we couldn't afford it and made me go to the public school instead. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Did your mother explain why the private school wasn't an option? She said it was too expensive and too far from our apartment. Brooke's voice carried a hint of the old resentment. But my dad said he would help pay for it if that's what I really wanted. Did your father make that offer directly to your mother, or did he only mention it to you? Brooke hesitated, and I could see her realizing the implication of Marcus's question. He told me he would talk to her about it, but did he actually have that conversation with your mother? I'm not sure, Brooke admitted, her confidence wavering slightly. Marcus pressed gently. Do you know how much tuition at that private school costs per year? No, Brooke said quietly. It's $43,000 annually. Marcus stated matter-of-factly. Were you aware that your mother works 60 hours a week to pay for your current living expenses and that she's already taking on debt to cover legal fees for this custody battle? Victoria Cross objected, claiming relevance, but Judge Hernandez allowed the question. Brooke shook her head, looking genuinely surprised by the financial information. Brooke, you mentioned that your mother asks a lot of questions about your visits with your father. Do you think it's possible that she's concerned about your safety and well-being, rather than trying to control you? I guess it's possible, Brooke conceded, though her tone suggested she didn't really believe it. Marcus continued his gentle questioning for another 15 minutes, carefully exposing the gaps in Brooke's understanding of the situation without directly attacking her perceptions. He highlighted the difference between parental concern and control, between appropriate boundaries and manipulation, but I could see that Brooke remained largely unconvinced. When the cross-examination ended, Brooke stepped down from the witness stand with the same composed dignity she'd maintained throughout her testimony. As she walked past my table, she didn't look at me, but I caught a slight hesitation in her step, as if some small part of her was beginning to question the narrative she'd been fed. The morning break was called, and I found myself standing in the courthouse hallway, watching through the window as Nathan embraced Brooke in what appeared to be a congratulatory hug. Stephanie stood beside them, her hand on Brooke's shoulder in a gesture of support that should have been mine to give. Marcus approached with 2 cups of coffee, his expression grim but not hopeless. The good news is that she's 16, not 18. The court recognizes that teenagers can be influenced and manipulated. The bad news is that her testimony was very compelling, and she genuinely believes what she's saying. I accepted the coffee gratefully, using the warmth of the cup to steady my shaking hands. She thinks I'm the villain in this story, Marcus. How did I become the villain? Because Nathan is very good at what he does, Marcus replied. But we're not done yet. This afternoon we present our case and we have evidence that speaks louder than perception. As we prepared to return to the courtroom, I thought about the recordings hidden in my purse, the documentation I'd spent months gathering, the witnesses who would testify to what they'd seen and heard. Brooke's testimony had been devastating, but it was based on Nathan's carefully constructed version of reality. The truth was messier, more complex, and infinitely more damaging to the image he'd worked so hard to create. The afternoon session would be my chance to show Judge Hernandez who Nathan Pierce really was when he thought no one was watching. The question was whether the truth would be enough to overcome the damage my own daughter had done to my case, and whether exposing Nathan's manipulation would help Brooke see clearly, or drive her even further away from me. As the bailiff called us back into session, I caught sight of Brooke sitting beside Nathan in the gallery. She was whispering something to him, and he was nodding with the satisfied expression of someone whose plan was working perfectly. But I noticed something else in her posture, a slight tension that hadn't been there before Marcus's cross-examination. Maybe, just maybe, a few seeds of doubt had been planted. The battle for my daughter's future was far from over, and the most crucial phase was about to begin. The afternoon session began with Nathan taking the witness stand, his posture radiating the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. He wore an expensive charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, his silver hair styled with just enough casual wave to appear approachable while maintaining an air of success. This was the Nathan Pierce the world saw, the successful Lake Oswego businessman who coached Little League and donated to children's charities. Victoria Cross guided him through his testimony with practiced ease, establishing his credentials as a devoted father and successful professional. He spoke about his marketing consulting firm, his involvement in Brooke's school activities, and his genuine concern for her emotional well-being. When discussing our marriage, his voice took on a tone of measured sadness, painting himself as someone who'd tried everything to save our relationship but had been defeated by my alleged instability. Nathan, can you describe your relationship with Brooke and how you've worked to maintain it since the divorce? Victoria asked. Brooke is the most important thing in my world, Nathan replied, his voice carrying just the right amount of emotion. Since Claire and I separated, I've made it my priority to provide her with stability and unconditional love. I never speak negatively about her mother in front of her, even when Claire makes decisions that I believe are harmful to Brooke's development. I watched him perform, recognizing every calculated gesture and inflection. This was the same man who had spent our entire marriage systematically undermining my confidence, who had made me question my own sanity with his gaslighting and emotional manipulation. But to the court he appeared to be the picture of a reasonable, caring father. Have there been instances where you felt Claire's parenting decisions were detrimental to Brooke? Victoria continued. Nathan's expression grew thoughtful, as if he were reluctant to criticize me but felt compelled by duty to his daughter. Unfortunately, yes. Claire has a tendency to be overprotective to the point where it stifles Brooke's independence. She monitors every aspect of Brooke's life, questions her decisions, and creates an atmosphere of constant surveillance that I believe is damaging to a teenager's development. He leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on a tone of genuine concern. More troubling is the way Claire has tried to poison Brooke against me. She questions every gift I give our daughter, suggesting that my love is somehow conditional or manipulative. She's made Brooke feel guilty for enjoying time with me, for appreciating the stability I can provide, for having a relationship with Stephanie. The lies flowed so smoothly that I might have believed them myself if I hadn't lived through the reality. Nathan's ability to twist truth into fiction was masterful, taking my legitimate concerns about his manipulation and reframing them as evidence of my vindictiveness. Can you give the court a specific example of this behavior? Victoria prompted. Certainly, Nathan replied. Recently I planned a skiing trip to Bend for Brooke, Stephanie, and myself. It was going to be a wonderful bonding experience, something Brooke had never done before. When I mentioned it to Brooke, she was thrilled. But when she told Claire about it, the questions began immediately. Who else would be there? What were the sleeping arrangements? Had I gotten permission first? He shook his head with practiced disappointment. Instead of being happy that our daughter would have this opportunity, Claire turned it into an interrogation. She demanded to speak with Stephanie, wanted detailed itineraries, questioned my judgment as a parent. The process became so contentious that I ultimately had to cancel the trip. Brooke was devastated, and I had to explain to her that sometimes adult conflicts interfere with opportunities for children. I felt Marcus tense beside me as Nathan masterfully reframed the skiing incident. He'd made my reasonable requests for information sound like harassment, my parental responsibility sound like interference. Most damaging of all, he'd positioned himself as Brooke's protector from my alleged unreasonableness. How has this pattern of behavior affected your relationship with Brooke? Victoria asked. It's created an impossible situation, Nathan replied, his voice heavy with apparent regret. Brooke loves her mother, but she's also becoming increasingly frustrated with the restrictions and negativity that seem to surround their relationship. She's started expressing to me that she feels more comfortable, more free to be herself, when she's at my house. That's not something I encouraged, it's simply her honest observation. Judge Hernandez leaned forward, her pen poised over her notepad. Mr. Pierce, what is your ideal custody arrangement, and why do you believe it would serve Brooke's best interests? Nathan's expression grew serious, and he looked directly at the judge with apparent sincerity. Your Honor, I believe Brooke should live with me primarily, with regular visitation with her mother. My home provides the stability, space, and emotional freedom that a 16-year-old needs to develop into a healthy adult. I can offer her educational opportunities, like the private school she wanted to attend, that Claire simply cannot afford. He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. I want to be clear that I don't believe Claire is intentionally harmful to Brooke. I think she's struggling with the divorce, with financial pressures, with the reality that Brooke is growing up and needs different things than she needed as a child. But those struggles are affecting her parenting, and Brooke shouldn't have to suffer for them. The performance was flawless. Nathan had managed to appear generous and understanding, while systematically destroying my credibility as a parent. He'd acknowledged my financial limitations with fake sympathy, while using them as evidence of my inadequacy. Most insidiously, he'd suggested that my protective instincts were really symptoms of emotional instability. When Victoria finished her direct examination, Marcus stood for cross-examination with the bearing of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. He approached Nathan with deceptive casualness, his first question seemingly designed to reinforce Nathan's image as a successful, caring father. "Mr. Pierce, you mentioned that you never speak negatively about Claire in front of Brooke. Is that an absolute statement?" "Yes," Nathan replied confidently. "I believe children should be protected from adult conflicts. And you've never made comments about Claire's financial situation, her work schedule, or her living arrangements in Brooke's presence." Nathan hesitated for just a fraction of a second, but I caught it. "I may have made factual observations about differences in our situations, but never in a critical way." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "What kind of factual observations?" "Well, for instance, noting that Claire works very long hours and might be tired when she gets home. Or acknowledging that our living spaces are different sizes. These aren't criticisms, they're just realities." "I see, and when you make these factual observations, do you also explain to Brooke why these differences exist? For example, that her mother works long hours to support her, or that the size difference in living spaces is due to financial circumstances beyond her mother's control?" Nathan's composure flickered slightly. "I don't think it's appropriate to burden a child with adult financial concerns. But you do think it's appropriate to point out the disparities without context." Victoria Cross objected, but Judge Hernandez allowed the question. Nathan's answer came more slowly this time. "I simply acknowledge reality when it's relevant to conversations we're having." Marcus moved to his table and picked up a manila folder. "Mr. Pierce, do you recall a conversation you had with Brooke last summer about her mother's apartment?" "I have many conversations with my daughter. Could you be more specific?" "A conversation where you mentioned that it was unfortunate that Brooke didn't have her own bathroom at her mother's house, unlike the en-suite bathroom in her room at your house." Nathan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I may have made such a comment. It's a legitimate concern about privacy for a teenage girl. And did you mention during that conversation that the reason for this difference was that you receive substantial rental income from commercial properties while her mother works as an employee?" "I don't recall the specific details of every conversation," Nathan replied, his tone growing slightly defensive. Marcus continued methodically, pulling out documentation as he went. "Pierce, you testified that you want to provide Brooke with educational opportunities her mother cannot afford. Are you currently paying child support?" "Yes, I pay the court-ordered amount." "Which is how much per month?" $1,200. "And are you aware that the tuition at the private school you mentioned Brooke wanting to attend is $43,000 annually?" "Approximately, yes." "So you're suggesting that Claire, who receives $1,200 monthly in child support and works to cover all of Brooke's other expenses, should somehow afford an additional $43,000 per year for private school tuition?" Nathan straightened in his chair. "I offered to help with the additional costs." "You offered to help? Did you make this offer directly to Claire, in writing with specific terms about how much you would contribute and for how long?" "I discussed it with Brooke first to see if she was interested. But you didn't actually make a formal offer to Claire?" "Not initially, no." Marcus paused, letting that admission hang in the air. "Pierce, when you told Brooke you would help pay for private school, did you explain to her that you hadn't yet worked out the details with her mother, or did you allow her to believe the offer was definite?" "I wanted to gauge her interest before involving Claire in complex negotiations. So when the private school option didn't materialize, and Brooke was disappointed, did you explain to her that you hadn't actually made arrangements with her mother, or did you allow her to believe that her mother had rejected a concrete offer?" Nathan's carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack. The situation became complicated because of Claire's response. "What was Claire's response when you finally discussed the private school with her?" "She was immediately negative about the idea." "Did she ask questions about the financial arrangements, the logistics, the long-term commitment?" "She asked many questions, yes." "And you interpreted her questions as negativity, rather than due diligence?" Victoria Cross objected again. but Judge Hernandez was clearly interested in this line of questioning. Marcus continued to systematically dismantle Nathan's narrative, exposing the gaps between his public statements and his actual behavior. Mr. Pierce, you mentioned the skiing trip to Bend. How much advance notice did you give Claire about this trip? I believe it was about a week. 6 days actually, according to the text messages. And the trip was planned for a 3-day weekend, when Brooke was scheduled to be with her mother. The dates worked best for everyone's schedule. Everyone except Claire, who had already made plans to spend that weekend with Brooke. Nathan's composure was definitely slipping now. I wasn't aware of Claire's specific plans. Did you ask? I assumed if there were conflicts, Claire would mention them. Marcus pulled out his phone and read from it. I have a text message you sent to Claire about the skiing trip. May I read it to the court? He didn't wait for permission. Quote, Brooke is really excited about skiing this weekend. I hope you won't find reasons to complicate this like you usually do. Stephanie has already bought her gear. End quote. The courtroom was silent as the implications of that message sank in. Nathan had essentially presented the trip as a done deal while simultaneously preemptively blaming Claire for any objections she might raise. Does that sound like someone seeking cooperation from a co-parent, Mr. Pierce? I may have been frustrated by previous experiences, Nathan admitted. Previous experiences where Claire asked reasonable questions about plans involving her daughter, where she created unnecessary complications and delays. Marcus set down his phone and picked up another document. Mr. Pierce, I'd like to discuss your relationship with Stephanie Walsh. How long have you been dating? About 2 years. And she's been involved in parenting decisions regarding Brooke? She's been supportive of my relationship with my daughter. Yes, has she ever been alone with Brooke overnight? Nathan hesitated. Occasionally when I've had business travel. And did you discuss these arrangements with Claire beforehand? Stephanie is a responsible adult. I didn't see the need for detailed discussions. So you made unilateral decisions about leaving your 16-year-old daughter in the care of someone Claire had never met without informing her. Stephanie and Brooke have an excellent relationship. That wasn't my question, Mr. Pierce. Did you inform Claire when you left Brooke in Stephanie's care overnight? The silence stretched uncomfortably before Nathan finally answered. Not always, no. Marcus continued his methodical destruction of Nathan's credibility for another 30 minutes, exposing pattern after pattern of behavior that revealed him to be exactly what I knew he was: a master manipulator who used his resources and charm to control situations while making his victims appear unreasonable. When the cross-examination finally ended, Nathan left the witness stand looking significantly less composed than when he'd begun. His perfectly styled hair was slightly disheveled from running his hands through it, and his confident demeanor had been replaced by barely controlled irritation. As he walked past my table, he shot me a look of pure venom that reminded me why I'd been so afraid of him during our marriage. For just a moment, the mask had slipped completely, revealing the angry, controlling man beneath the polished exterior. Judge Hernandez called for a brief recess, and I found myself alone with Marcus in the hallway. That was good, I said, feeling a spark of hope for the first time all day. It was a start, Marcus replied carefully. But we need more than just exposing his manipulation tactics. We need evidence that shows the court what he's really like when he thinks no one is watching. I touched the recording device in my purse, thinking about the hours of documentation I'd gathered over the past months. I think we have that. Then it's time to show Judge Hernandez who Nathan Pierce really is, Marcus said. But Claire, I need you to understand that once we present this evidence, there's no going back. Brooke may never forgive you for exposing her father this way. I looked through the courthouse window at the gray Portland sky, thinking about the little girl who used to trust me to protect her from monsters. She may never forgive me if I don't, I replied. At least this way she'll know the truth eventually, even if she can't accept it now. The afternoon was far from over, and the most crucial part of our case was still to come. When court reconvened, Marcus stood with a deliberate calmness that I had come to recognize as his courtroom demeanor when he was about to deliver something significant. Judge Hernandez looked expectantly at him as he approached the bench with a small digital recorder in his hand. Your Honor, the defense would like to present audio evidence that we believe is crucial to understanding the true dynamics of this custody situation. This evidence was legally obtained by my client in accordance with Oregon's one-party consent laws, as Miss Davidson was present for all recorded conversations. Victoria Cross immediately stood, her voice sharp with objection. Your Honor, we haven't been provided with copies of any audio recordings. This is highly irregular and prejudicial. Judge Hernandez held up her hand. Counselor Thompson, when were these recordings made, and why weren't they disclosed during discovery? Marcus had prepared for this challenge. Your Honor, these recordings were made over the past 6 months as my client documented ongoing interactions with Mr. Pierce. They were not disclosed earlier because we initially hoped this case could be resolved without exposing Mr. Pierce's private communications. However, given the serious allegations made against my client's fitness as a parent, we believe the court needs to hear how Mr. Pierce actually speaks to and about my client when he believes these conversations are private. I'll allow a brief sample, Judge Hernandez decided. But counselor, this had better be directly relevant to the custody determination. Marcus connected the digital recorder to the courtroom's audio system. Your Honor, this first recording was made 3 months ago during a phone call between my client and Mr. Pierce regarding Brooke's school schedule. The courtroom fell silent as Nathan's voice filled the space, but this wasn't the measured, reasonable tone he'd used during his testimony. This voice was cold, cutting, and filled with barely contained rage. You're being ridiculous about this, Claire. Brooke doesn't need your permission to join the debate team just because it meets during your custody time. You're so desperate to control every aspect of her life that you can't stand the thought of her succeeding at something that doesn't revolve around you. My own voice came through the speakers, notably calmer but clearly strained. Nathan, I'm not trying to control anything. I just want to know what the time commitment involves so I can adjust my work schedule. If debate meets until 6 on Tuesdays, I need to arrange childcare pickup. Childcare pickup? Nathan's laugh was harsh and mocking. She's 16, not 6. But I guess when you live in that cramped little apartment and work at a dead-end job, you have to manufacture problems to feel important. Stephanie manages her schedule just fine without all this hand-wringing. I work 60 hours a week to support our daughter, Nathan. I'm sorry if my job isn't impressive enough for you, but it pays our bills. Barely. Nathan's voice dripped with contempt. Look, if you can't handle the logistics of having a teenager with actual opportunities, maybe we should reconsider who she lives with primarily. Brooke shouldn't have to limit her potential because you can't afford proper child care or manage your schedule like a competent adult. The recording continued for another minute, with Nathan systematically attacking my job, my home, my parenting capabilities, all while positioning himself as the reasonable parent trying to provide opportunities for our daughter. When it ended, the courtroom was eerily quiet. I watched Brooke's face during the playback, seeing her confusion and growing discomfort. This wasn't the patient, understanding father she described in her testimony. This was someone who spoke to her mother with undisguised cruelty and condescension. Marcus moved to the next recording. Your Honor, this conversation took place 6 weeks ago when my client called to discuss Brooke's upcoming parent-teacher conferences. Again, Nathan's voice filled the courtroom, but this time he was speaking to someone else, presumably Stephanie, not realizing that I was still on the line after he thought he'd hung up. She's calling about the parent-teacher conferences now, can you believe it? Like she has any idea what's actually going on at Brooke's school. The woman works retail hours at some marketing firm and thinks she's qualified to discuss our daughter's academic future. Stephanie's voice was audible in the background. Did you tell her about the math tutor? Hell no, let her figure it out when the teacher mentions it. Maybe it'll finally dawn on her that Brooke gets real support here, not just emotional manipulation and guilt trips. The kid's been so much happier since she started spending more time here. I swear another year of Claire's neurotic hovering and Brooke would need therapy. Maybe you should just go for full custody, Stephanie suggested. I mean, what does Claire really provide that you can't do better? I'm working on it, Nathan replied, his voice taking on a calculating tone. Brooke's starting to see the differences herself. Claire's job situation isn't getting any better, and that apartment is becoming more inadequate as Brooke gets older. Plus all those questions and restrictions are wearing thin. Give it a few more months of Brooke comparing her life here to her life there, and she'll be asking to move in permanently. The recording ended with Nathan's laugh, a sound that made my skin crawl with its casual cruelty. I glanced at Brooke again and saw that her face had gone pale, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Judge Hernandez's expression had grown increasingly stern during the playback. Mr. Thompson, how many of these recordings do you have? 7 total, Your Honor, spanning the past 6 months. They all follow similar patterns of Mr. Pierce disparaging my client's parenting, her financial situation, and her living arrangements, often while strategizing about how to turn Brooke against her mother. Victoria Cross was on her feet immediately. Objection, Your Honor. This is character assassination based on private conversations taken out of context. Everyone vents frustrations in private, and these recordings prove nothing about Mr. Pierce's fitness as a parent. Actually, Counselor, Judge Hernandez replied coolly, they prove quite a lot about Mr. Pierce's actual attitude toward co-parenting, and his respect for the mother of his child. Mr. Thompson, I'll hear one more recording, and then we'll move on. Marcus nodded and queued up another file. Your Honor, this recording was made 2 weeks ago during a phone call about Brooke's upcoming birthday party. Nathan's voice came through the speakers again, but this time he was speaking directly to Brooke, not realizing that I had called during their conversation and the call had connected to voicemail, recording everything. Sweetheart, you know your mom's going to try to make your birthday about her drama, right? She'll probably want some small depressing party at that apartment because she can't afford to do anything nice. But we could throw you a real party here, invite all your friends, have it catered, maybe even hire a DJ. Brooke's voice, younger, and more uncertain than it had sounded in court, responded hesitantly. But Mom's already started planning something. She asked me to make a guest list last week. Oh honey, Nathan's voice was patronizingly sympathetic. I'm sure she means well, but you're turning 17. This should be a celebration that matches how special you are, not some sad little gathering that screams we can't afford anything better. You deserve so much more than what she can give you. I don't want to hurt her feelings, Dad. Of course you don't, because you're a good person. But sometimes protecting someone's feelings means enabling their limitations. Your mom needs to understand that she can't provide for you the way I can, and the sooner she accepts that, the better it'll be for everyone. Especially you. There was a pause, and then Brooke's voice sounding smaller. Sometimes I feel bad about having nice things here when Mom works so hard. And that's exactly the problem, Nathan replied, his voice hardening slightly. She's made you feel guilty for accepting the life you deserve. That's manipulation, Brooke. Healthy parents want their children to have the best possible opportunities, not feel bad about them. Your mom's making you choose between her feelings and your own happiness, and that's not fair to you. When the recording ended, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. I saw Brooke wipe her eyes quickly, trying to hide tears that she clearly didn't understand. The father she'd defended so passionately was systematically revealed to be someone who spoke about her mother with contempt, and used her love for both parents as a weapon against me. Marcus returned to his table and picked up a thick folder. Your Honor, in addition to these audio recordings, we have extensive documentation of Mr. Pierce's pattern of alienating behavior. Text messages where he makes disparaging comments about my client's financial situation. Email communications where he unilaterally changes custody arrangements and blames my client when she objects. Financial records showing that while he claims concern for Brooke's welfare, he has consistently fought efforts to increase child support even as his own income has grown substantially. He opened the folder and began displaying documents on the evidence table. We have testimony from Brooke's former teacher, Mrs. Rachel Morgan, who witnessed Mr. Pierce making inappropriate comments about my client during a school conference. We have statements from neighbors who have observed Mr. Pierce's behavior during custody exchanges. And we have financial documentation showing that Mr. Pierce has been systematically undermining my client's stability while claiming to be the stable parent. Victoria Cross stood again, but her objections seemed weaker now, more desperate. The carefully constructed image of Nathan as the reasonable, caring father was crumbling under the weight of his own words. Marcus continued methodically presenting evidence, each piece building on the last, to create a comprehensive picture of psychological manipulation and parental alienation. Phone records showing Nathan calling Brooke immediately after difficult conversations with me. Text messages where he offered elaborate gifts or experiences immediately following incidents where I'd had to enforce rules or boundaries. Your Honor, Marcus said, approaching the bench with another document. This is perhaps the most telling piece of evidence. It's a series of text messages between Mr. Pierce and his girlfriend, Stephanie Walsh, discussing their strategy for winning Brooke's loyalty. He read from his phone, his voice carrying clearly across the silent courtroom. From Nathan to Stephanie, dated 6 weeks ago, Brooke's starting to complain about Claire's rules more often. I think it's working. Need to keep contrasting freedom here with restrictions there. Stephanie's response, maybe plan something fun for next weekend, when she's supposed to be with Claire. Give her a reason to want to switch. Nathan's reply, good idea. The skiing trip didn't work out, but I'm thinking concert tickets for that band she likes. Make it the same weekend as Claire's birthday party for her grandmother. I felt physically sick as the extent of Nathan's manipulation became clear. He hadn't just been undermining my relationship with Brooke, he'd been actively orchestrating scenarios designed to make her choose between us, always ensuring that his options appeared more appealing. Judge Hernandez was taking notes furiously, her expression growing more severe with each revelation. When Marcus finally finished presenting his evidence, she looked directly at Nathan, who had grown progressively more agitated throughout the presentation. "Mr. Pierce," she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom's silence, "would you like to explain these recordings to the court?" Nathan stood slowly, his composure completely shattered. The polished businessman who had testified earlier was gone, replaced by someone who looked cornered and desperate. "Your Honor, those conversations were private moments of frustration. Every divorced parent has moments where they're not at their best. Pierce, these recordings span 6 months and show a consistent pattern of behavior. This isn't about momentary frustration. This is about a systematic campaign to alienate your daughter from her mother. I've never tried to turn Brooke against Claire," Nathan protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "I've always encouraged their relationship." Judge Hernandez held up the text message transcript. "You've encouraged their relationship by planning competing activities during Claire's custody time, by systematically undermining her financial stability while criticizing her for not providing more, by teaching your daughter to feel guilty for loving her mother." Nathan's face flushed red, and for a moment I saw the man I'd been married to, the one who emerged when his control was threatened. "Claire is not fit to be Brooke's primary guardian," he said, his voice rising. "She works constantly, she lives in substandard housing, she can't provide the opportunities that Brooke deserves. I'm trying to protect my daughter from a life of limitations and missed opportunities, by manipulating her into believing that her mother's love is conditional, and her father's superior resources make him the better parent, by showing her that she doesn't have to settle for less than she deserves." Nathan shot back, his mask finally slipping completely. The outburst hung in the air like a confession. Nathan had just admitted, in open court, that he viewed my financial limitations as disqualifying factors for motherhood, that he believed his wealth made him inherently superior as a parent. I looked at Brooke, and saw her staring at her father with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger or disappointment, it was recognition. For the first time she was seeing Nathan clearly, without the filter of his manipulation, and her own desire to believe in the perfect father he'd pretended to be. Judge Hernandez called for a recess, but as people began to file out of the courtroom, Brooke remained seated, her face in her hand. Nathan approached her, but she looked up at him with eyes that held something I'd been hoping to see for months: doubt. "Brooke, honey, you have to understand," Nathan began. But she stood up and walked away from him, moving toward the door without a word. As she passed my table, our eyes met for the first time all day without the wall of resentment that had stood between us. She didn't speak, but something had shifted. The recordings had done what months of gentle explanation couldn't. They'd shown her who her father really was when he thought no one was listening. The afternoon had shattered Nathan's carefully constructed facade, but I knew the hardest part was still ahead. The truth was finally out, but the question remained: would it be enough to save my relationship with my daughter, or had Nathan's manipulation done damage that even the truth couldn't repair? The recess stretched longer than usual, giving everyone time to process what had just unfolded in the courtroom. I found myself standing in the courthouse bathroom, staring at my reflection and trying to steady my breathing. The woman looking back at me appeared older than her 34 years, worn down by years of fighting battles on multiple fronts. But there was something else in her eyes now, something that hadn't been there in months: hope. When I emerged from the bathroom, I found Brooke sitting alone on a bench in the hallway, her face streaked with tears she was no longer trying to hide. My instinct was to go to her, to wrap her in my arms the way I had when she was small and the world had hurt her. But I held back, uncertain whether my comfort would be welcome or just another source of confusion in her already shattered reality. Marcus appeared beside me, his expression cautious but optimistic. "Claire, Judge Hernandez wants to speak with Brooke privately before we reconvene. It's standard procedure when there's been such a significant shift in testimony." I nodded, watching as a court officer approached my daughter and gently guided her toward the judge's chambers. Brooke moved like someone in a trance, her usual teenage confidence replaced by the uncertain steps of a child who'd just learned that the ground beneath her feet wasn't as solid as she'd believed. Nathan stood at the far end of the hallway with Victoria Cross, their conversation animated and heated. Even from a distance, I could see his agitation, the way his hands moved as he spoke, the rigid set of his shoulders. This wasn't the composed businessman who'd entered the courthouse that morning. This was a man whose carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. Stephanie had disappeared entirely, probably realizing that being associated with Nathan's exposed manipulation wasn't a good look for someone who'd been positioning herself as a maternal figure to Brooke. Her absence spoke volumes about the depth of her commitment to my daughter versus her commitment to the lifestyle Nathan provided. The wait felt endless. I paced the hallway, checking my phone compulsively, trying not to imagine what Brooke might be telling Judge Hernandez in the privacy of her chambers. Was she defending her father despite the evidence? Was she finally seeing the manipulation for what it was? Or was she simply overwhelmed by the collapse of everything she'd believed about her family? When Brooke finally emerged from the judge's chambers, her face was puffy from crying, but there was something different about her posture. She walked with more certainty, as if some internal battle had been resolved. She didn't look at Nathan as she passed him in the hallway, and when her eyes met mine, I saw something I hadn't seen in months: my daughter, not the stranger she'd become under Nathan's influence. Court reconvened with a gravity that made everyone sit straighter in their seats. Judge Hernandez took her place at the bench with the bearing of someone who'd reached a difficult but necessary decision. Her eyes swept the courtroom before settling on Nathan, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Mr. Pierce, I've been presiding over family court for 15 years, and I've seen many cases of parental alienation. What distinguishes your case is not just the systematic nature of your manipulation, but the calculated cruelty with which you've executed it. You've used your financial resources as weapons against your daughter's mother, and you've taught your child to view love as a commodity that can be bought and sold. Nathan started to speak, but Judge Hernandez held up her hand. I'm not finished. The recordings presented today reveal a level of psychological manipulation that goes far beyond normal post-divorce adjustment. You've deliberately undermined your daughter's relationship with her mother while positioning yourself as her savior from circumstances that you've actively worked to create. She turned her attention to the courtroom as a whole. Parental alienation is a form of child abuse. When a parent systematically turns a child against the other parent, they're not protecting that child, they're harming them. They're teaching them that love is conditional, that relationships are competitions, and that manipulation is an acceptable way to get what you want. Judge Hernandez's gaze returned to Nathan. Mr. Pierce, your testimony today was carefully crafted to present yourself as the reasonable parent concerned about your daughter's welfare. But your own words, recorded during what you believed were private conversations, tell a very different story. They reveal a man who views his ex-wife's financial struggles as personal failings, who uses his resources to create impossible choices for his daughter, and who takes satisfaction in her mother's pain. The judge paused, consulting her notes before continuing. The court has also reviewed the extensive documentation provided by Ms. Davidson's counsel, including text messages, email communications, and witness statements that corroborate the pattern of alienating behavior revealed in the audio recordings. This isn't a case of one parent's word against another's. This is a case where the evidence speaks clearly and consistently. Nathan's face had gone ashen, and I could see his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the edge of the defendant's table. The reality of his situation was finally sinking in, and for the first time in our relationship, he was facing consequences he couldn't manipulate his way out of. Brooke, Judge Hernandez said, turning to address my daughter directly, I know this has been an incredibly difficult day for you. Learning that someone you love and trust has been manipulating your perceptions is one of the hardest things a person can experience. But I want you to understand something important. None of this is your fault. Brooke nodded, tears streaming down her face, but she maintained eye contact with the judge. I know that now, she said quietly. I talked to someone today who helped me understand what was happening. I thought I was making my own choices, but I realize now that I was just choosing between the options my dad gave me. Can you explain what you mean by that? Judge Hernandez asked gently. Brooke took a shaky breath. My dad never told me I couldn't love my mom, but he made it really hard to enjoy being with her. Every time I came home happy from his house, my mom would ask questions and I thought she was being jealous or controlling. But now I realize she was probably worried about how he was influencing me. She glanced at me briefly before continuing. And every time my mom had to say no to something because of money, my dad would point out how he could say yes. He never said my mom was bad with money, but he made it clear that life with him meant fewer restrictions, fewer worries, more opportunities. Judge Hernandez nodded encouragingly. You're demonstrating remarkable insight for someone your age, Brooke. What you're describing is a sophisticated form of manipulation that many adults wouldn't recognize. I feel so stupid, Brooke whispered, and I feel terrible about the things I said about my mom. She was just trying to protect me, and I thought she was trying to control me. You're not stupid, Judge Hernandez said firmly. You were being manipulated by someone you trusted, someone who used your love for him to distort your perceptions. The fact that you can see it now shows strength and maturity. The judge turned back to address the full courtroom. Based on the evidence presented today, and my conversation with Brooke in chambers, this court finds that Mr. Pierce has engaged in systematic parental alienation designed to undermine the relationship between Brooke and her mother. This behavior is not in Brooke's best interests and constitutes a form of emotional abuse. Nathan jumped to his feet, his voice cracking with desperation. Your Honor, I love my daughter. Everything I've done has been to give her a better life, to provide opportunities that her mother simply cannot afford. I may have made mistakes in how I communicated my concerns, but my intentions were always pure. Mr. Pierce, Judge Hernandez replied coldly. Your intentions are irrelevant when your actions have been systematically harmful to your daughter's emotional well-being. Love doesn't manipulate. Love doesn't turn children against their parents. Love doesn't use financial resources as weapons in custody battles. She consulted her notes again before delivering her ruling. Effective immediately, primary custody of Brooke Davidson is awarded to her mother, Claire Davidson. Mr. Pierce will have supervised visitation rights, 2 hours every other Saturday, with supervision provided by a court-appointed family counselor who specializes in parental alienation cases. The words hit Nathan like physical blows. Supervised visitation, he sputtered. Your Honor, that's completely unreasonable. I've never harmed my daughter physically. I've provided her with every advantage, every opportunity. Mr. Pierce, you've harmed your daughter psychologically and emotionally. The supervision is necessary to ensure that you don't continue the pattern of alienating behavior that brought us here today. Additionally, you'll be required to complete a parenting course focused on co-parenting and healthy communication before any consideration of expanded visitation rights. Judge Hernandez wasn't finished. Furthermore, all communication between Mr. Pierce and Miss Davidson regarding Brooke must go through the family counselor for the next 6 months. Mr. Pierce is prohibited from making any disparaging comments about Miss Davidson in Brooke's presence, and any violations of this order will result in further restrictions on his parental rights. Nathan's face cycled through shock, rage, and something that might have been genuine grief. For all his manipulation and control, I believe he did love Brooke in his own twisted way. The tragedy was that his need to win, to be the preferred parent, had destroyed the very relationship he claimed to be protecting. Your Honor, Victoria Cross interjected. My client would like to appeal this decision. That's his right, Judge Hernandez replied. But the order goes into effect immediately, and I'll be providing detailed documentation of my reasoning to support the ruling. Mr. Pierce's pattern of behavior is well documented, and I believe any appellate court will find the evidence as compelling as I have. As court was dismissed, I sat in stunned silence, barely able to process what had just happened. After months of fearing that I would lose Brooke forever, the legal system had not only protected our relationship but had also validated everything I'd experienced during our marriage and divorce. Brooke approached my table tentatively, her eyes red from crying but clearer than I'd seen them in months. Mom, she said softly, I'm so sorry for everything I said, everything I believed. I thought I was protecting Dad, but I was really just hurting you. I stood and opened my arms, and she fell into them with the desperation of someone who'd been lost and had finally found her way home. You don't need to apologize, I whispered into her hair. You were being manipulated by someone you trusted. That's not your fault. But I said such terrible things about you in court, she sobbed against my shoulder. I told everyone you were controlling and jealous and couldn't provide for me properly. I painted you as the villain when you were just trying to be my mom. And you were just trying to be a good daughter to both of us, I replied. Your father put you in an impossible situation, Brooke. He made you feel like you had to choose between us, and then he stacked the deck so his choice looked better. That's not love, that's manipulation. We held each other in the middle of the courtroom, while people filed out around us, both of us crying for different reasons. Brooke was grieving the loss of the father she thought she had, while I was overwhelmed with relief and gratitude that our relationship might actually be salvageable. Marcus appeared beside us with a gentle smile. Ladies, we should probably continue this reunion somewhere more private. There are still some legal procedures to complete, but the hard part is over. As we gathered our things to leave, I caught sight of Nathan standing alone by the defendant's table. Stephanie was nowhere to be seen. Victoria Cross was packing up her files with obvious displeasure, and he looked genuinely bereft. For just a moment, I felt a flicker of pity for him. He destroyed his relationship with his daughter in his desperate need to win her away from me. But the pity passed quickly when I remembered the months of anguish he'd put us through. The systematic way he'd turned my own child against me. The cruel satisfaction he'd taken in my pain. Some consequences were too well deserved for sympathy. Outside the courthouse, Brooke and I sat in my car for a long time, neither of us ready to return to normal life after such a seismic shift in our reality. The Portland sky had cleared while we were inside, and late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windshield, warming our faces. "What happens now?" Brooke asked quietly. "I mean, I know the legal stuff, but what about us? How do we fix everything that's been broken?" I considered her question carefully, knowing that our path forward would require patience, honesty, and probably professional help. "We start by being honest with each other about what we've both been through. We probably need family counseling to work through all the damage that's been done. And we need to remember that healing takes time." "Are you angry with me?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. "No, sweetheart. I'm heartbroken that you went through that manipulation, and I'm angry at your father for putting you through it. But I'm not angry with you. You were a victim in this too." Brooke was quiet for a moment, staring out the passenger window at the courthouse where her understanding of her family had been completely rewritten. "I keep thinking about all the times I defended him to you, all the times I made you feel like you were the problem. How did I not see what he was doing?" "Because he's very good at what he does," I replied honestly. "Your father is intelligent, charming, and persuasive. He knows how to make people feel special while slowly isolating them from other relationships. That's not something most 16-year-olds would recognize, especially when it's coming from someone they love and trust." "Will you tell me about the marriage?" she asked, suddenly. "I mean, I know you guys got divorced because you weren't happy, but I never really understood what that meant. After hearing those recordings today, I'm wondering if there's a lot I don't know about who my father really is." The question was fair, but it was also dangerous territory. I'd spent years trying not to poison Brooke against her father, even as he'd been systematically poisoning her against me. Now that the truth was out, I had to find a way to be honest without being vindictive. "Your father is someone who needs to be in control," I said carefully. "During our marriage, he gradually convinced me that my feelings, my opinions, and my needs were less important than his. He never hit me, but he found other ways to make me feel small and worthless. When I finally found the strength to leave, he turned that same controlling behavior toward our custody arrangement." "Did he do to you what he did to me? The thing where he makes you feel like you're making your own choices, but really you're just choosing between his options?" The insight took my breath away. "Yes," I said simply, "that's exactly what he did." Brooke leaned back in her seat, processing this information. "I'm scared about the supervised visit," she admitted. "What if he's angry with me for telling the judge the truth? What if he tries to make me feel guilty for choosing you?" "The supervision is there to protect you from exactly that," I assured her. "And if he does try to manipulate you during those visits, you'll have someone there whose job it is to recognize it and stop it. Plus, you know what to look for now." That's powerful protection. As we finally drove away from the courthouse, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not the fragile, temporary peace that comes from avoiding conflict, but the deep, lasting peace that comes from truth finally being acknowledged and justice being served. The months that followed weren't easy. Brooke struggled with guilt and confusion as she processed the extent of her father's manipulation. We started family counseling, where she learned to recognize the difference between influence and manipulation, between genuine care and conditional love. I learned to trust her again, to stop walking on eggshells around her emotions, to be the parent she needed, instead of the parent I'd been afraid to be. Nathan's supervised visits were sporadic, and eventually stopped altogether. According to the family counselor, he spent most of the sessions trying to convince Brooke that the court had been unfair to him, that I had somehow orchestrated his downfall. When these tactics failed to win her back, he gradually lost interest in maintaining the relationship he'd fought so hard to control. Stephanie disappeared from our lives entirely, her commitment to Brooke apparently contingent on her relationship with Nathan and the lifestyle it provided. Brooke was hurt by this abandonment but not surprised. She'd learned to recognize the difference between people who loved her for herself and people who saw her as an accessory to someone else's life. A year later, Brooke and I were sitting in our small Hawthorne District apartment, working on college applications together. The space that Nathan had criticized as cramped and inadequate had become our sanctuary, filled with laughter and honest conversation, and the kind of comfortable silence that only comes from truly knowing and accepting each other. "Mom," Brooke said, looking up from her laptop, "I never thanked you properly for fighting for me. I know there were times when it would have been easier to just let Dad win, especially when I was being so horrible to you. You were never horrible, I replied. You were confused and manipulated. But you were never horrible, and I didn't fight for you because it was easy. I fought for you because you're my daughter and I love you unconditionally. That's what real love does. It fights for the relationship even when the other person can't see its value. She smiled. The same smile that had lit up my world when she was small, and still believed I could protect her from every monster. I see it now, she said. I see the difference between someone who loves me enough to set boundaries and someone who removes boundaries to make me dependent on them. That's wisdom that will serve you well in all your relationships, I told her. Romantic, professional, friendships, everything. Real love empowers you to be your best self. Manipulation makes you dependent on someone else's approval. As I watched Brooke work on her college essays, writing about resilience and the importance of critical thinking, I realized that Nathan's manipulation had ultimately backfired in the most profound way possible. Instead of creating a daughter who would always choose comfort over truth, he'd created a young woman who valued authenticity above all else. Instead of teaching her that love was conditional and must be earned through compliance, he'd shown her what real unconditional love looked like by contrast. The legal battle was over, but the real victory wasn't the custody ruling, or the supervised visitation, or even Nathan's eventual disappearance from our lives. The real victory was sitting across from me, confident and self-aware. No longer the confused teenager who testified against me in court, but a young woman who understood the difference between manipulation and love, between control and care, between winning and actually being right. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.